Hey everyone, welcome back to the OnBase Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Moody, and today we're thrilled to have Gabe Rogol with us to talk about how AI agents are reshaping go-to-market and Demandbase 4.0. Gabe, thanks for joining us today and welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Moody. You're okay if I call you Moody, right?
Oh yeah, that's perfect. Well, it's good to see you too. And I know we have a bunch to talk about. The first thing, I just said Demandbase 4.0. I'd love for you to talk about the defining shift behind that and what we're starting to leave behind.
Yeah, we, really believe that we're moving into a whole new phase of not just demand-based, but really the account-based go-to-market. And we call that phase 4 because there's been 3 previous phases that have roughly been 4 years apiece. And there's a huge shift happening right now. And I think the defining change is really that we're going away from the phase of like kind of monolithic closed platforms that think of an account-based go-to-market as something that can be achieved with kind of one technology to more open, flexible technologies. So that's one. Another defining shift is that it's kind of the relationship between the power of the technology behind APM and how manual it is. So being able to make the most powerful aspects of account-based technology accessible, quicker time to value through what I call assisted automation, which is really agentic advances in technology and AI modeling.
Yeah, it's really awesome. I just came back from an event. Actually flew overnight and slept about 45 minutes. But there were
Okay.
lots of conversations around open and transparent and flexible and how that's coming to life because of how this is happening at Demandbase. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned going from Demandbase 1.0 all the way through 3.0 that's helping us to build 4.0?
Phew, there's a lot of them. I mean, I think the biggest is that to be successful with an account-based go-to-market, you have to think of it as a strategy and not a tactic, right? And that if you click down into what that means, it means it's not just leads, it's not just a marketing thing, it's not just one technology. It's really an organization's approach, starting at the executive level, to align your resources to the accounts that drive the greatest lifetime value. And that's why enlisting all of those resources, whether they're people, processes, or technologies, to kind of all be moving in the same direction is so important. And that's why, we keep hitting on the technologies that do this have to be open and flexible and kind of automated in certain ways, uh, in order for our customers and in order for all of us that have a go-to-market to realize the potential of an account-based go-to-market.
Yeah, I love that, Gabe. And I'm curious if you had a soapbox and you could shout from up on a hill about the biggest pain point in the market that you think we are solving that other folks aren't talking about, what would that be?
I think it's the relationship between being scalable because every business changes over time. We see, you change through growing, you change through moving into new markets, you change through new technology advances that we're all dealing with now. Being able to handle that scale while still being integrated with the tech stack. And I think there's kind of been this development of two different camps where you have on the one side black box monolithic platforms that kind of try to help you scale ABM. And on the other side, you have what I call light ABM, or what some people call unbundled ABM, which is really about how do you put like the components and pieces of ABM together so that it's integrated across your tech stack. And the reality is, at different phases of your development, you have to do both. And what we're really trying to solve for is how do you both scale and grow, but also integrate with all these different technologies in ways where the sum is greater than the parts. So it's kind of bringing together the best of dedicated platform type technology that's open with the ethos of kind of the unbundled, open, flexible, and working together in a friendly way into a powerful way to grow your go to market through every phase of your business. That's my soapbox.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's good. I love the soapbox question too. You hit the passion point and you really start to find that. Anyone who's been to an event lately or who's been to demandbase.com or follows Demandbase on LinkedIn has seen conversations happening about agent base. And if they weren't on the LinkedIn live with you and Chad, what would you describe agent base as to someone who doesn't know what agent base is?
Agent Base is a framework for our customers that has a unified approach to assisted automation. And it's a technology that sits upon our unified data layer, which brings in first and third party data for us to rapidly scale and roll out agents to our customers. And over time, I think this framework that we built, again, on top of our unified data platform, which brings together first and third party data and gives you a complete view of your accounts, buying groups, people, not only will enable Demandbase to roll out agents, more quickly, but also, it's our vision that that'll help other companies develop internal agents for themselves to utilize this unified data platform. So it's super exciting.
I like that a lot. And look, we all love to talk about the art of the possible, whether that's personally, professionally. What does agent base help enable folks to do that wasn't possible previously?
I really think of it, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about what going into phase four of the account-based go-to-market. What are the two things I talked about? We're leaving behind monolithic, black box platforms, and we're leaving behind the idea that the most powerful aspects of account-based go-to-market are kind of manual and complex. So I'm super excited because I think, what agents can do is take those really powerful aspects of platforms and kind of democratize them. And so some of those things are like building segments in really powerful ways. In the past, you've had to kind of go in and kind of architect, engineer across your first and third party data. What are the most powerful segments to drive revenue in specific ways, like just prompt based building of audiences, making things much quicker. Journey stages, that's like, how do accounts go through your funnel? Like, what behaviors have to happen for them to move to the next stage, and what automations happen? That has been complex, making that much more accessible through automation. And then, what's the next action? How are you orchestrating across your tech stack? Again, it's been about like kind of creating rules-based approaches. You might see like kind of people talking about workflows and kind of graphs and putting things together. That all should be done through agents, with human oversights in ways where value comes much more quickly. So, I'm really excited that the most powerful aspects of account-based technology now you can realize the value quicker through, agentic advances.
I think everyone loves getting rid of the tedious and manual task. How close do you think we are to a truly autonomous go to market?
I don't necessarily believe in a fully, autonomous go to market, in that if we're defining it as like every aspect of the go to market just runs, one, because I don't think that the technology will even be possible to be there for several years. But two, I think there's aspects where AI, even down the road, is going to be super strong. Notably like making the tedious, like you said, not, kind of just magic and happen. But there's going to be aspects where, humans, and we'll talk more about this, are always going to be important. The kind of the creative aspect, the kind of the, just what the machine just doesn't know from human relationships, all those sorts of things. So, I really think of it as assisted automation. That's what we want. We want to make, all the things that AI can do well, free us up for all the things that, you know, humans can do well. So I'm not a believer in a fully autonomous go-to-market, but I think it could be much more autonomous than it currently is.
Yeah, it leads me to the conversation around, are we adding new roles, or getting rid of people with things like this? Do you think agent base is helping to enable new roles or new responsibilities, or does it replace some of the existing ones that may exist in an org chart today?
I think it's a nuanced question because I think there's not necessarily going to be new roles, you know, that are just going to be, hey, you know, we're working with agent base, or we're working with, you know, agents, you know, from regardless of where they come from. I think it's more about enabling current roles. You know, there might then be some ability to be more efficient with the resources you have. But you know, I think in my mind, efficiency may be, although incredibly important and kind of obvious in the benefits of agents, I guess in some ways has been overplayed in that, or overemphasized in the sense, why don't we emphasize expansion and growth as much as we're emphasizing efficiency, right? So if we have the same roles and they can be more productive, why don't we use those added productivity to grow more, right? And so I think everybody's kind of currently hitting on, you know, yes, we can make things more efficient because we're enabling current roles. But I think the unlock is going to be, and I think agent base can help with this, is like, let's enable current roles. Yes, maybe there's efficiency, but now there's so much more productive. Let's really focus on how we grow more.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because it does seem like most of the use cases default to efficiency and save time, and it's not always a growth mindset. I think that's a really important point, and a lot of our listeners have probably seen billboards about not hiring humans, whether that's on LinkedIn or in San Francisco or other cities. Let's talk about SDRs. I know that there are several companies that are doing AI agents as SDRs and trying to replace some of that function. I'm curious your stance. Do you think that's the future of an SDR? And if so, what does that look like?
Well, first off, I think, you know, going back to the theme of like certain aspects of AI and the AI go to market being overemphasized and maybe therefore missing where even greater benefits could be utilizing AI. I think, you know, just as in the kind of the efficiency conversation we just had, I think the focus on SDRs has been kind of overemphasized, you know, because it's kind of a race to that, you know, use case because let's be honest, it seems obvious, right? In the sense that if we think of SDRs as just being emailing, you know, really all we have to do is essentially, you know, kind of email either inbound interest or email and outbound prospecting, you know, then hey, we're going to automate the SDR. And there's a certain component that email is a component, and certainly making emails quicker for SDRs is important, and you know, kind of making you know, doing all the spell checking and doing much more than that. But that's not all an SDR does, you know. And you know that where is that really going if we're saying it's about email? Are we just creating spam machines? I mean, you can see a lot, you know, if you research, you know, how these SDR, you know, there's a lot of benefit from AI assisted SDR, flat out. And I'm a big fan of a lot of the companies that do that. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm not. But, you know, the amount of emails going out right now and the response rates from email, you know, I think just a few years ago, you know, if you were a good SDR, you know, or you could get 5 to 7% response rate. You know, now companies are happy with like sub 2% response rate. So is all of this focus really making us better? Is it really enabling growth more? And so, kind of going back to my overall theme, I don't know if we should think about it in terms of we're limiting SDRs. It's how are we making great SDRs, or how are we producing more great SDRs, right? And great SDRs are creative. You know, they form relationships. You know, they become more data driven. Um, so I think there's an aspect, you know, that's important. And then going back to my initial point here, why are we just focusing on this use case so much in the go-to-market? What about, you know, kind of the things I was mentioning around, how about core account-based use cases? Like, how do our audiences get better? How does our measurement of how we're moving through the funnel get better? How does orchestration get better, not just through SDRs, but through all channels? You know, I want us to be spending more time thinking, you know, focusing on that, you know, at Demandbase, but also, you know, as stewards of our go-to-market, you know, because there's so much upside there.
Yeah, that was a really great response, Gabe. It just makes me think about the best outreach I receive, and it is always a human that's taking the time to get to know me and spending time to build a relationship and doing something creative, and that stands out. And I think many of us are already able to detect when AI is assisting or creating content by itself. The same thing is going to happen to outreach, to your point. So when everyone's doing it, you create the sea of sameness again, and then I think the human touch is going to stand out even more, which is kind of a segue into the risk that you may see with the rise of AI agents. What are some of the risks that you think exist, and how should companies prepare for them?
Well, you know, beyond maybe like, you know, kind of the privacy risks that I think a lot of people talk about in terms of like what data becomes usable to I think data accuracy and is a risk, or kind of hallucinations is another way to put it, and then fragmentation of the go-to-market. So on the first point, you know, we don't talk enough about how dirty most CRMs are, and data foundations are for most companies. We see it over and over again. And if you know, think about that in terms of like, how does an agent work? It works by, you know, utilizing data in language models, right? And if you're utilizing data that is inaccurate, you're kind of exponentially increasing the impact of that inaccuracy. So without, you know, until I see as much focus on data accuracy as there is on AI and agents, I think there's going to be an imbalance and potentially negative impact for companies. Um, and then on the second point, it kind of goes to what we were saying about spam and email, but like, if you think about an account-based go-to-market, you know, you're selling complex solutions, you're trying to align all your marketing functions, you know, your sales functions, your customer success functions, your op functions, and you're bringing in all these kind of point type agents to do different kind of aspects of it. If they're not all kind of interoperable or working together, then you get this kind of, instead of the focus, you know, laser on the, you know, the same message to the same account to drive it forward, you're getting like, you know, everything is playing out, and the chances are that your marketing message is going to align with your SDR and sales message, and the data through RevOps is going to be the same. Is it becomes worse, and so I sometimes think of it, you know, as the issue that you have. You know, everybody has marketing automation and sales automation. They're kind of two, at their worst, two separate spam machines that are not coordinated in any way. Imagine that exponentially amplified with all these agents crisscrossing. And so I think, unfortunately, there's a danger that the go-to-market is going to become more fragmented, therefore less efficient.
Yeah, I want to pull on the thread of data accuracy and data integrity, and it makes me think about trust. What do you think the role of trust will be in the next generation of go-to-market systems?
Well, trust will be foundational, right? Because I believe at the foundation of your go-to-market, if you've got a complex go-to-market, you're selling B2B, complex solutions, it's about alignment, right? It's about alignment of your technology, alignment of your resources, because you are trying to focus where there's the greatest lifetime value of your customers. That's the whole point of an account-based go-to-market. And how do you get alignment? You get alignment through trust. That we've all seen horror stories of sales and marketing not aligning because they don't trust each other. They don't trust. Maybe sales doesn't trust marketing saying they're being successful because they're generating leads or opportunities, and for some reason that they're when they get to sales they don't seem like real opportunities, right? That's a classic scenario, but it's just one example of where if you don't have trust, things break down. And so, that's what goes down, it goes back to what we were saying at the outset of what is phase 4 all about for account-based go-to-market and for demand-based. It's all about being open, flexible, transparent, so that, the functional areas can have more trust and the agentic solutions that work off of our platform and data can be more trusted so that the end result is a more efficient and effective and rapidly growing go-to-market. So trust is absolutely foundational.
Yeah. I love that point too. I mean, it makes me think of Jody Liba and her quote that we have on slides, right? I don't ever want sales to come to me and say, why did you pick this account? If you don't trust everything that you're doing, that's going to be the question. And no marketer wants to hear that. No seller wants to ask that. We all know the pain of that. And, the pain, let's talk about pain for a minute. I have spent weeks as an analyst with lots of people painstakingly arguing over the meaning of account base to figure out that single definition on a slide. And lots of weeks of my life went into those debates. As we use AI and all the tools that orbit AI to decide what's relevant in our go to market strategy, how does that change the meaning of account based?
Well, my definition of that, and I don't know if this solves the pain that you just had, if you're willing to accept it, because it's probably, uh, it misses something. But the way I think about it is it's aligning your go-to-market resources to the accounts with the greatest lifetime value. And I don't think agents change that. What it does, though, is it expands what is, if you go back to that definition, what does aligning go-to-market resources mean? What do resources mean, right? So if you flash back like 20 years, what were the resources that you were aligning? You were probably aligning, sales, marketing. SDR wasn't even really a function yet. It was just starting to be a function. You had CRM, there was no marketing automation, right? So that's what it meant to align. You know, 10 years ago, it was aligning that plus SDRs, maybe starting to align customer success, which was just coming into play. Marketing automation was certainly around. 5 years ago, it's that, with account-based platforms, um, more data assets. And now that definition of resources expands to include agents. And so now we have to think about, going back to what I was saying about the risk of agents. How do we make sure that they're not going off in all different directions and they truly are account based, so that they're aligned to the accounts that matter most? And so I think it doesn't change the definition in my mind, but it expands the things you have to align.
All right. I love that. And I think you're uniquely positioned to answer this question well because you think a lot about the future of demand base, the future of go to market, the future of revenue teams. How do you see the role of go to market teams changing in the next 3 years? And how are you helping demand base prepare for that shift?
I think, in a way, the functions are coming closer together, which I guess is natural given we've been beating the drum about alignment. And so if you play that through, you can almost think of marketing, sales, as the distribution element of a company, right? And what is the fundamental thing that distribution, kind of element of a company has to do? And I think it's aligning around pipeline creation. And I think historically there's been, if you go back years, it's kind of like marketing is focused on leads, marketing qualified leads, and then you have sales qualified leads, you have opportunities, and then you have sales focused on bookings. Actually, as I talk to more executives, as we as Demandbase try to help companies with their go to market, it's not leads that's the issue, because you're really not trying to just go for people, right? You're really trying to go after the accounts that matter in buying groups. And it's not necessarily bookings, because, most companies do a pretty good job in the sense that their win rate, they know their win rate, and they can kind of dial that up a point or two, but you kind of know what your win rate is. The problem is the amount of pipeline you have. And I think the more the go to market as a whole is focusing on pipeline, the more unified it's going to be and the more growth there's going to be. And I think there's going to be an agentic component to that, which is what we talked about, like making everything kind of that's tedious more automated. And then there's going to be the human component, which is going to be the creativity, which is going to be the insights, which is going to be the human being good at the human relationships, whether they're kind of asynchronous or synchronous, right? And and what are we doing? I think as we build out our technology, that's what we're like really hell bent on solving is, outcome based kind of interaction with our platform. Like you're setting in goals, we're helping to produce pipeline. And so I think the functions coming together and rallying behind pipeline and technology that drives pipeline, I think is going to unlock so much.
What part of the traditional go to market playbook do you think is obsolete? And I'm curious, for whatever you think is obsolete, why is everyone still doing it?
Uh, well, it kind of goes back to the previous answer in part. I think leads are, I don't know if obsolete is the right word, but just about obsolete. They should be tertiary. Um, and I think last touch attribution as well. And I'm talking about in complex B2B, because it's just the reason both why they don't work, and also because the reason why people still rely on them, probably especially last touch attribution, is because they're simple, right? You kind of can say, hey, I put in X amount of money and I got Y amount of leads and, Z amount of kind of last touch from different channels. But the big problem is you're dealing with complex organizations that you're selling to over long periods of time. And if you think about optimizing towards those simple metrics, then you have no visibility into all the things that you should be doing earlier. And if your competitors are, then you're kind of optimizing yourself out of existence by kind of going to that endpoint. And so I've been trying to like hammer the kind of the death nail into that, for a while, those things, but they still exist. And I think we've got to make those obsolete, at least in terms of being primary measures.
Yeah. Great points there. And another thing we've talked about for multiple decades now, personalization. I'm curious what your thoughts are on personalization and if there may be something we should focus on instead.
I actually think that personalization is underrated. So I think it should remain, but that goes back to, is it like AI personalization only, utilize, or is it AI plus human? The best outreaches I've ever seen have been thoughtful and personalized, right? I mean, ultimately humans buy, and they buy because the message resonates, and whatever, and it resonates differently for different people. So I think personalization is something that will always be important. However, I think what's underrated is, and maybe should be, to your kind of original question, what should be emphasized more is, who are you personalizing to? Because if you're personalizing to the wrong type of buyer, then it's a bad thing to personalize to them, because you're spending more times in the sales cycle. You might be selling products to a company that ultimately will churn. So I think just as much as we focus on personalization, we have to focus on understanding our ICP and being very disciplined and focusing on the ICP, or you're wasting time and you're selling to bad customers.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, look, you've heard my rant. I've talked about it a lot on episodes, how marketers chase shiny objects. I do think sometimes our profession is very quick to jump to something new before we conquer what we're already doing, whether that's personalization, marketing automation, account based, right? Like we're on to the next before we actually master it. So, some great clarifying points there. If you could radically reinvent one part of the go to market today, what would it be?
Well, I think I can say this, and maybe I have a bias for saying it because my background is sales. It was sales. Um, I think, in most organizations, especially enterprise organizations, that sales departments have advanced the least in the last 15 to 20 years. I think it might be different in kind of small technology companies. You see more advances, but we work a lot with enterprise and mid-sized companies, and I think there's still salespeople just coming in too late. Salespeople still kind of, where's the lead? You know, um, Wanting everything to be warm. Where, as I mentioned earlier, like sales and marketing should be coming together more as the distribution kind of engine of a company around pipeline, and that means being much more data centric or signal centric. You hear a lot about signals, but what does that really mean? It means you have to get earlier in the process, and that may mean you're reaching out to people that aren't as warm as they were 20 years ago, but that's the way people buy now, right? They buy without late, they buy later, with kind of moving through more and more of the sales cycle before they get to a salesperson. We've known that for so long, and I just feel like sales teams haven't been held accountable to that enough, and it's really hurting, their ability to grow.
Great stuff. All right. We have one more question, Gabe, before we go into the lightning round. I know we have tons of stuff to do today. I'm sure CEOs aren't busy at all these days. So, all right. The last question before we hit the quick hitters. What is something you believe about the future of go to market that most CEOs would disagree with?
I think that you have to invest more in marketing. I think if you go back to what we were saying about and expand it, that so much of what AI is talking about is efficiency. So much of what, the focus on the last 3 years in the macro environment has been about, you know, efficiency and margins, rightly so, coming after growth at all costs. But, enterprise value, economic value comes from growth. And I don't think a lot of CEOs give marketing the voice it needs to adequately evaluate, how do you hit your pipeline plan? And, going back to where the real value of people are going to be, positioning, brand, relationship building, events, field marketing, all that stuff. It's not just leads or last touch opportunity creation, and measure that like in that way. And so, I would advocate for CEOs that, we have to continue to invest more. And I've seen data recently that there's a huge correlation between the amount you grow and what percentage of your overall revenue you spend back on marketing. The more you spend, the more you grow. And so that's yet another soapbox.
Yeah, and the crowd goes wild. I think everyone's going to love that answer. We'll clip that and push that out on social. All right, lightning round. Very quick answers here. Favorite tools or technology that you're using?
This might not be quick because people might not know what it is, but have you ever heard of Zettelkasten?
No.
So Zettelkasten, this is more of a tool, but it can be a technology, is a note-taking system. It was based on, there was a German sociologist, Niklas Luhmann, who was incredibly prolific, had all this kind of advances in sociology. And when they went back and, looked at how he was doing things, he basically created these, system of note cards. That's what Zettelkasten is, like notes in a slip box, and he put them in a box. And the way he took notes was, instead of being linear, it's like, here's the point, here's the point, here's the point. He found what the essential ideas are. And instead of kind of in every book, I'm going to have the linear notes, he connected those essential ideas between what he read and he absorbed, and he linked them. And you can do that, kind of in the non-digital way, or you can do it, you could do it in the offline way or digitally. So there's tools like Obsidian and others that work with the Zettelkasten system. But there's a lot of power in this kind of Zettelkasten tool.
Love that. Can't wait for the LinkedIn posts on that one, Gabe. All right, looking forward to that. Good reads, favorite books, blogs, newsletter, podcasts.
Yeah, I'm in this really into, this might be a little old school, but HBR, Harvard Business Review. I've got their compilations. They have them around decision making, like agile, project management, like anything that you can, AI. And the reason that I like them is these HBR compilations is because if you get a business book now, most of them have this formula. Here's one idea. I'm going to stretch it out over 300 pages by being repetitive and having little stories, because I think I'm Malcolm Gladwell. And I just I read it for about 30 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, the fluff. So these HBRs are kind of like, they take out all the fluff. So I love that.
What about good people? Who inspires you in the B2B space?
Ooh. That's a tough one. I think all the CEOs advancing, kind of, obviously Salesforce, Benioff, the people that are being really daring and bold to move forward, where we're going. And I just love to see companies, and I think Salesforce does a good job of this, of moving so quickly to take advantage of market opportunities. And I really aspire to kind of move fast to serve customers. And I think, Salesforce does a great job of that.
Love it. Last question, Gabe. Most important one. How can everyone get in touch with you after this episode?
LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, you crushed it today, Gabe. Thanks so much for all your time.
Great conversation.